Good afternoon. My name is John Clary. I'm with the Wichita Public Library. I've been a librarian here for about 25 years. Welcome to today's virtual program, Business Planning for Nonprofits. We have a few housekeeping items to go over before we begin. Please keep your microphones turned off during the program so we are able to hear the speaker. There is a microphone at the bottom left of the screen that says mute. A red line through the icon means your microphone is turned off. If you have questions during the program, please type your question using the chat feature. Along the bottom of your screen, you will see a word bubble with the word chat underneath. Clicking this icon will open a chat box where you can type your question, and we will have a question and answer session during and at the end of the program. At the top of the screen, you can change your view so that you can see the speaker at all times. Click on Speaker View. At the end of the program, you should have received a link to do a quick survey. If you can, please take time to complete this. We look at each of these surveys and use those to help plan future programs. I'm happy to introduce our speaker today is Cindy Miles with the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber. Cindy has held multiple profit and nonprofit activities in her career path. She has many years of experience with marketing and social media marketing, as well as all things nonprofit. So she is the person you need to know and want to learn from. So thank you for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you, Cindy.
Thank you, John. I'm excited to present today. So I'm going to share my screen, and we pull up the PowerPoint that I have available. And so I think I know everybody on here but Regina. Regina, can you tell me just a little bit about yourself and why you're participating in this today?
Sure. Hi, Cindy and everyone. I started a nonprofit organization. I'm calling it from New York City. And
okay.
My organization is to help women who have gone through divorce, overcome life-changing experiences, and get results so they don't have to keep repeating their past.
Very good. That's and how long has it been since you started your organization?
Well, I've been doing it for quite some time, but I just started the nonprofit in January.
Okay. Very good.
I'm still at the beginning.
we're glad to have you today.
Thank you.
We will get started in this process, in this presentation. And so the first thing I just like to talk about is the business planning process really is a process for helping you identify you've got this idea. You need to evaluate whether or not it's something practical, whether or not there's other people doing the same thing, whether it makes sense to start a new nonprofit organization. And so the business planning process really helps you go through that evaluation process, because we all have some great ideas. I know I'm thinking all the time and, contemplating what do we need in the community and everything, but every idea that I have probably isn't the best idea. So it is a way to do that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about phases of starting a nonprofit. So it's kind of weaved into this presentation because I can talk about the nonprofit business plan, and I will talk about the nonprofit business plan, but you just kind of need to understand what are the phases of starting a nonprofit organization. So phase number one, really, when you're doing a startup, really has to do with planning and research for the nonprofit organization that you're going to start. And we'll go more into depth about that. And that's all the pre-prep work you do. And I'm sure you did, Regina, to get ready to file your legal paperwork and all to be recognized as a nonprofit organization. And of course, phase two is legally establishing that organization, but there is a lot of pre-work to be done. And then phase 3 of starting a nonprofit is the things that you do to maintain your nonprofit status. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits and hundreds of startup nonprofit organizations. And I've been surprised the number that I've spoken to over the years that for some reason have not done the things that they need to do to maintain their nonprofit status, and they've lost it. And so I think it's important to make sure that we talk about how do we maintain our nonprofit status. So let's talk about the research, the planning and research in phase 1 that needs to be done when you're starting a nonprofit organization. So one is to kind of know, assess, research those similar providers that, and whether they're doing exactly what you're doing or they're maybe doing something similar to what you're doing. It's good to know who's doing what. Are there opportunities to partner with those other organizations, or are you doing something that just literally fills a gap? Which I'm a gap seeker. So when I do stuff, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit business that I look to start, it's always about filling gaps for me. So knowing who those providers are, collecting data about the population you're going to serve, the need for the service that you're going to provide or the product, depending on what you're doing with your nonprofit organization. So it's good to collect that data. And both of these things, these first 2 things will definitely help you down the road when you look for funding for your organization. If you already have an idea who's doing what, you have some data around that, that's really important. Of course, you have to have a name for your organization, and it's good to try to find something that's maybe a little bit unique. So when somebody goes to look for your organization, they don't find 200 other organizations with the same name. I recently worked with a nonprofit startup that, and I can't remember what the name was, but when we researched that name, even though the name was available in the state of Kansas to be incorporated, there was lots of other organizations using that. So trying to think of something that's a little bit unique, but still maybe describes what your organization is doing. You have to develop a mission statement for your organization. It can be something and should be something short, no more than a sentence. Talks about who, what, when, where your organization is doing what it's doing. You have to recruit a governing board. And of course, nobody owns a nonprofit organization. That's why it's a nonprofit organization. It answers to a board of directors, and those board of directors are legally and financially responsible for the organization. So even if you found a nonprofit organization, you will never have 100% total control over that organization. And even if you decide to work for the organization, you will then answer to the board of directors. So nobody can profit from the organization. That's why it's called a nonprofit. So you can't found an organization, work for the organization, and still have voting rights on the governing board. And then there's that creating a business plan, which is what we're going to go more in depth to on this presentation today. We're going to go into the steps of that. But that business plan really helps you prepare, think about all the programs, the services, how you're going to market, what the budget's going to be. And that document, that business plan document, is again fantastic for nonprofit organizations to be able to present to potential donors, or to be able to use that information that you've gathered when you're writing grants, or to talk to potential board members about what you're doing. So there's lots of opportunities to use that business plan, and there's a reason why it's important. And then another step in phase 1 is, of course, determining the budget for a financial startup. And we'll talk about a 3-year budget. I know the IRS, when you're doing your 1023 or your 1023 EZ, the EZ doesn't require you to present a budget. The 1023 application for your 501c status does require you to submit that 3-year budget. All right, so other reasons to create a business plan. Of course, it illustrates the demand for your nonprofit organization and the programs and services that you're providing. The fact that, there's not hundreds of other people doing exactly what you're doing. It identifies the need or the demand for the people that you're going to serve, or for the product that you're going to provide, or for the service that you're going to provide. Your business plan will be able to do that. It also identifies how you intend to meet that demand or meet the need in the community. What are you going to do that's different than everybody else is doing? Specifically, if you're starting an organization that is going to do something somebody else is doing. And a good example of this is here in Wichita, we have a number of organizations that address homelessness. And, they provide shelters and different types of services for homelessness. I had a woman that came to me recently, wanted to work on a nonprofit startup, wanted to address homelessness. But what she wants to do is build some small buildings. And this has been done in another state, almost like sheds that the homeless people could potentially stay in, as opposed to staying in tents. So I'm not really sure how that'll work, but certainly we haven't addressed the homelessness population 100% here. And I doubt that we ever will, actually. And I explained to her that part of the reason that we don't meet that need 100% is because the funding just isn't there. And one more nonprofit really is just continuing to compete for the existing funding. Another reason to create the plan is it demonstrates what expertise you or your board or the people that are involved with your organization, what kind of expertise do you have to meet the need? What expertise do you have to do it better than the other organizations that are potentially doing what you're doing? And it also, as I said earlier, will help you with getting funding. And you all be sure and stop me if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer any questions along the way. So the business plan really is a plan for the future. It describes who's going to do what, when, where they're going to do it, and how they're going to do it. So one of the things that you also want to do is think about defining your goals. So what is your, you develop this mission statement. So that kind of states what it is that you're going to do, what the work is that you want to do. You also need to think about what you want to achieve. So doing your mission every day is one thing, but you need to really think about what it is that you want to achieve overall. Is that so for Regina's sake, maybe she's got 100 more women that are living better lives. Whatever it is that you want to achieve, you really need to define what that is. And then you also need to define what strategies you're going to use to achieve those goals. So whether it's opening up more places for people to live, providing additional services that'll help them go back to work, whatever it is that you're going to do, you need to identify those strategies. And then you also need to have an idea of how you're going to measure your success for the organization. And all of these things too, related to your goals, will also help you as you look for particular grant funding or other funding. You might want to conduct a personal audit, or you probably should conduct a personal audit and kind of think about, as you're starting the organization, what can you bring to the organization? And these things that I have listed here are certainly important things to be able to bring to the organization. You're going to have to fundraise at some point in time. You're going to have to market that organization. You're going to, that includes social media marketing, maybe having a website, having brochures. It's always good to have some management experience. And if you can bring that to the organization, that's good. Certainly, if you have similar nonprofit experience, that's great to bring to the organization. Formal education and any other special skills and talents. So think about what it is that you have to offer that will help make a difference with the organization. You can look at doing a feasibility study. And even if you don't hire somebody to do one formally, you just conduct a feasibility study yourself. That really will give you an idea before you go into this process of whether or not what you're going to do is feasible. I think there's a lot of people in this world that have great ideas for businesses or nonprofits, either one, but for some reason or another, even though they want to do that, whatever it is that they want to do, maybe there's not enough potential people to serve. Maybe there's simply not enough potential funding to come in. And so it's good to kind of go through this process of looking at the information of the industry overall. Again, going back to the homeless population, who's doing what? Is there enough of a gap that you can fill that gap? Are there enough resources? Is there enough funding? I work with a lot of nonprofit or startups that they think that they'll start a nonprofit organization and everybody will provide them funding, or they can put a link up on a website that says donate now, and people will just donate. And no matter how good their cause is, that isn't the case. Fundraising is very hard. So really kind of identifying what are those needs and whether or not you're going to be able to find ways to meet those needs for that resource. Are you serving a specific target or niche market is always good to look at. And then what are the disadvantages of doing what you're thinking about doing? Did you have a question, Ron? Oh, Ron just disappeared.
No, thank you.
Oh, okay. I saw you raise your hand. I didn't know if you had a question. And then certainly looking at the finances overall and what you can expect to potentially bring in with the organization. And then the final thing after you've gone through these steps is coming up with a recommendation. Should you move forward or should you not move forward? Is this practical or is it not practical? Is it feasible to do? So the people that might help you prepare a plan, you see down there, one of those is SCORE. SCORE is fantastic at helping you develop a business plan. Certainly another nonprofit CEO or COO can have great input in developing your plan or helping you to develop your plan and or reviewing the plan, as is an accountant, an attorney, your board of directors, potentially an insurance agent. These are all people to potentially get aligned with that could help you either with preparing or even providing feedback. I just lost you guys. All right, so here's our nonprofit business plan outline. We're going to do an executive summary. There's going to be the body and the organizational structure, and I'm going to talk more in depth on these. You're going to describe your products, programs, or services. You're going to talk about the market demand. You're going to develop an operational plan. You're going to talk about your team, your board, and or your committees. And then you're going to talk about your budget. This plan is not going to be, we're not going to do like a 35-page plan. When I went to school many years ago and started and learned about developing a business plan, it was supposed to be like 35 or 50 pages. We don't write business plans that long anymore. And so we'll want to write this well, but keep it brief. So your executive summary of your business plan should, again, brief, 1 to 2 pages long. The more concise you can write, the better. If you are going to present this business plan to your board members, to a potential funder, to somebody you were talking to about grants, you want them to be able to take the time to read this. So as concise as you can write it, the better. So in your executive summary, you're going to provide an overview of what the plan is overall. So what is your purpose? That can include what the mission is for the organization, mission and purpose. Why are you unique? Why are you different than every other nonprofit organization or a similar nonprofit organization? And what advantages will you provide over what those other organizations are doing? You're going to want to give just an overview of what either your products, your services, your programs, how many that you're going to offer, just a brief description of each, what those are. And then who are your clients going to be? And you're going to get down into really describing, like, your clients are not going to be everybody. You really need to define who specifically they're going to be. And I'm going to give you a for-profit example. I started a business recently, and it's called the Slumber Party Place, and it is specifically for kids' parties, mostly overnight. My target audience, the people that I really want to get to, are moms who have kids that are between 5 and 13 or 14. I'm not going after everybody. I'm not going after dad specifically, because moms are more likely to book those parties. So really getting down into who are your clients. My clients for that particular business, they're kids, but they're moms. And so really identifying who you're going to serve, because you're not going to serve everybody. And even if your clients are going to be women, what women? What are the information about that women look like? Are they women that are in poverty, that have kids? Are they just women that are in poverty, that have been through a divorce? I mean, what are those women? What do they look like? What's the description of those women? You're going to talk a little bit about the need for what you're doing, because that's certainly important. And then the projections for the number of people that you hope to serve. I used to serve on the board of an organization. They've been around for a lot of years, and they try to serve 12 women a year, which seems like not very many women. But what they do is provide a very intense service, and that's really all that they're able to generally serve. So what are your projections for your number served? Is it going to be hundreds? Is it going to be a few? And then try to, with this executive summary, grab the reader's attention and be enthusiastic, concise, and professional. The next part is your body and organizational structure. You're going to generally describe what the organization does, its corporate structure. What does that look like? You can describe in this section, how do you expect, so you've got your startup phase, and that's going to look a certain way, but where does your organization want to be in 3 years? Or where does your organization want to be in 5 years? Here at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, when I came here, we were an organization that had a couple of programs, but I identified that in a couple of years, I wanted to be to the point where we could add board university and train people on everything about serving on boards or operating boards. And then I wanted to offer, in a couple of years, I wanted to offer board member matchup, because I felt like nonprofit organizations needed help with finding board members, and young professionals wanted to serve on boards and they didn't know how. So what does your growth look like for your organization? How do you plan to expand? What is it that you hope to achieve in the long run? And I know sometimes I've worked with people that, they want to start a small church, but then the church wants to do, they want to provide services to the homeless. And then down the road, they want to provide childcare. And down the road, they want to add something else. So think about that. And then also the industry trends. So what's going on in the industry? You're going to write about your products, programs, or services. And this is really getting more into depth about what do those products, programs, or services look like. Not only what the names of them are, but how will you actually offer those? Why they're unique, why they're different from what other organizations are doing. And again, how do you want to grow those programs or services sometime in the future? How do you want to evolve? What do you want to add? Then we're going to write more in depth on that market demand. So not only the market, but the subsectors of the market, and more in depth about that population that you intend to serve. What do they look like? Who else is serving that population? What is the need for what it is that you're doing? What gap are you filling? I think anytime that you can show that you're filling a specific gap, that's really important. And then how are you going to promote what you're doing to that market? Is it going to be through the website? Is it going to be through the social media? If you were serving the homeless population, there's other unique ways to reach that population, maybe than television or whatever. So you've got to think about how you're really going to promote what it is you're doing. So your operational plan, you're going to write about that, and it's going to have everything about how you operate your organization. So you're going to need to talk about where are you going to be located. Some of you might initially be located, you might be offering services, you might be officing out of your home. Some might need a building, some might be partnering with a church, maybe a community center, but you need to have an idea of where you're going to offer those services. And then what kind of inventory do you need? What kind of equipment do you need? I recently worked with a couple of women to start a new place for women who are coming out of domestic violence, prison, or have mental health issues. And I had to get them to really think about, they were buying a building, but everything that they needed in that building, beds, linens, cups, plates, silverware. I mean, there was a lot. So you've got to think about and putting in your business plan a complete list of what is that equipment and the things that you'll need. And then how will you distribute that service? Will you be out there on the streets with a truck handing out goods? Will you be offering services Monday through Friday from 10 to 2? Everything that you can possibly think about in regards to how you issue that service and how you distribute products or how you distribute that service, you'll write about that in this section. And then how will you continue to maintain those programs and services, those products, whatever it is that you're doing, and how will you intend to evaluate whether or not they're effective? With the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, one of the things that we do is we're constantly reevaluating what we're doing. Is this effective? We're constantly giving out surveys at the end of our programming, getting feedback that way. So whatever it is you're going to do to be able to help maintain and evaluate those programs and back up and regroup if you need to do so. So in regards to teams, you're going to need to describe in this section who's going to be your management team. And maybe as the founder, that kind of is you. You're kind of going to lead the management thing. But do you plan to have employees initially? Do you plan to have employees in the second year? What kind of experience are you going to need, and or will those different people that you hire need? Do you need a social worker? Do you need somebody that's going to be a peer mentor? What is it that you need? So describe what your plans are around that. Certainly providing a list of your board, committee, or advisory board members and what expertise they bring. I teach a lot about building diverse boards, especially boards that are diverse of experience, strengths, resources. Sorry, my husband's in here doing something. He was looking around the corner at me and I didn't know what he wanted. So you need to have that list. And then who are your active or maybe proposed financial sponsors who maybe has stepped up and said, if you do this, I'll provide you funding, I'll sponsor a woman, I'll sponsor whatever. Who are those people, if any, that currently exist? What kind of people have offered you up some sort of particular funding? That doesn't happen often, but sometimes it does, and hooray when it does. You'll want to create an organizational chart and kind of show what the lines of authority and responsibility, as well as the staffing needs. Now, generally, when you start a nonprofit organization, whoever the founder is going to be up there at the very top of that organizational chart. And as you build your board, then you'll add them on as well. But certainly creating that chart to think about how you want to add staff and what that staff needs to look like. But always have an idea of the lines of authority and responsibility. And interestingly enough, when you create a for-profit business and you found that business, you're usually up here at the top of the organizational chart and everybody else is underneath here. But when you found an organization and you take on the position, which often happens as the executive director, then you will be answering to the board. So the board will be up here on your organizational chart and you'll fall underneath the board as the executive director or whatever title that you have that you're being paid for by the company. So by the organization. So any questions about that? I know that's very confusing. Nope, we're good. Okay, you'll want to describe what your major milestones or what you hope your major milestones will be. And those apply to not only programs. So if you've, if your program has finished a complete year, if your program has served X number of people, what are those major milestones that you're going to establish that you really want to try to achieve? Serving a certain number of women, serving a certain amount of homeless population. What does that look like? And then what is your plan over a year or 2 years to be able to make an impact on that area? What are your goals for, what are your strategies again for how you're going to accomplish those goals? And then it's always great to create a proposed timeline for what you want to achieve and when you want to achieve it. So if you want to found this organization, you want to start working on founding this organization, whatever, and within 6 months, you want to have your board developed, you want to have your articles of incorporation done, you want to have your EIN number, and you want to submit your 1023 or 1023 EZ. Just put that in a timeline as to what you want to accomplish when, and then you want to launch your programs or services on around what time, and then so just creating some sort of a timeline so you can see that you're making some achievements. Oh, budget. Everybody loves budget, right? So as I said earlier, you have to create a 3-year budget for your 1023 application with the IRS, which I can answer more questions about for you if you would like. But I'm sorry, just a second. So when you go to create that budget, you need to think about all the expenses that you're going to have for startup in that first year, and what kind of revenue are you going to have in that first year. So are you going to potentially try to get some grant funding? Are you going to try to get some, you have some donor that has promised to give you money? Are you going to try to approach particular donors? just exactly how you're going to try to get that revenue. And for some of you, depending on what you're doing, like here at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, we can project some of our revenue, even if we were startup, based on memberships, based on the programs that we offer. So we can project some revenue that way. I know if you were opening a children's home, you can project that the state would pay so much per child for you, for the children that you're keeping in that home. So think about, what can your potential projected revenue be? And certainly all those expenses. What you have in your first year for expenses is going to be a whole lot different than what you're going to have in your second year, because in your first year, you might need to buy computers, you might need to buy new cell phones, you might need to buy a printer, you might need to buy certain equipment that you may not need that in your second year, but you still might need to host a website. So you may need to pay website hosting fees. You may have additional expenses that you're going to put out to serve your clients. So you've really got to think through what should be in that 3-year budget. And then talking about any requests or you're going to make any grant awards, people that again might support you, and people that might give you stuff. It says in-kind support. So in-kind support can be great because, if you've got somebody that says, well, we'll donate all the beds, that's fantastic. That's one less expense that you have to have. I know here in Wichita, quite often organizations reach out to us, companies reach out to us, and they're moving and they have extra office furniture or whatever. So we try to get that out to nonprofit organizations that need that. So if you get furniture donated, that's fantastic. One less expense. In the appendix of your business plan, you're really going to talk about, or you're really going to add maybe the resumes, your resume or other key management, a list of your board members, and I would include the strengths, skills, and experience that they bring to the table, what it is they do for a living, if they're not retired, if they're working, and any other pertinent charts, graphs, or illustrations that you want to include that might explain something else that you've talked about. I keep trying to watch the chat to see if I have any questions. Okay, I don't. All right, the phase 2 of legally establishing your organization. So you've got through that business plan. Is everybody relieved? You should be, because that business plan, that's it's a lot to think about, but very, very important. But the phase 2 of legally establishing your organization, I always tell the nonprofit startups that I work with, potentially they should consult with an attorney. And I tell them that because I'm not an attorney or accountant. I'm just some woman that's helped hundreds and hundreds of people start nonprofit organizations. Certainly, I think it's not absolutely necessary to consult with an attorney, depending on what you're going to do. If you're going to start a children's home and you're going to be working with a lot of children, or you're going to be housing inmates who have recently come out of prison, there's certain reasons that you might want to consult with an attorney and kind of find out some information about your liability and that type of thing. Certainly, you can start a nonprofit organization without ever consulting with an attorney. You've got to write and adopt your bylaws. So your bylaws, for those of you who may not know, are your operating agreement for your board of directors, and they are going to describe the board terms, how long the board members are going to serve, what are the officers, generally chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer, what are their terms going to be? Are those terms renewable? How do you bring board members on? How do you get rid of board members? How do you change the bylaws? They're generally going to have a dissolution clause in your bylaws, and the dissolution clause, the IRS will actually look for that dissolution clause when you do your 1023 application. The dissolution clause just says if your nonprofit organization shuts down for whatever reason, your funds will either go to a designated nonprofit, a nonprofit that does similar work to what you do, or that they'll just go back to the IRS. And that's what happened if you don't have a dissolution clause and you dissolve. All of your assets, all of your funds go to the IRS for them to distribute in whatever way they want. So it's important to have that dissolution clause in your bylaws as well. And not only do those bylaws have to be written, they do need to be adopted by your board members and generally signed off on by either the secretary or the chair. You have to have an office address for the organization, and it cannot be a PO box. It has to be an actual physical address. It can be your home address. It's just that you have to have a physical address. The next step is you will file an articles of incorporation. And Regina, I am not sure, because you're in New York, your process may be a little bit different as far as the state process. I don't know how you file an articles of incorporation there. Here in Kansas, we just go to the Secretary of State's office, kansasbiz.gov, and click on file an articles of incorporation or start a new business for a nonprofit. And we fill out a short form and pay our $20, and we instantly have an articles of incorporation. It's a very simple form to complete. Is that similar there, Regina?
Yes, it's the same.
Yeah. Okay. I thought so. I've looked at a few other states.
I wish it was just $20.
Oh, is it more there?
Yes.
Honey, the storage closet next to Michelle's office. Okay. And then the next thing will be you will need to get an EIN number. Again, that's a federal thing. So you'll go to the IRS website. Please don't go to any place other than the IRS website, because there are lots of scams out there related to business and nonprofit startups, where they'll say, well, we'll help you get your EIN for $100 or something like that. Don't do that. It doesn't cost you anything to get an EIN. You will need to use your own social security number, or a board member, or whoever's completing that paperwork. However, your social security number won't be tied to that nonprofit organization. The reason that they ask you to do that is to make sure that you're not in Russia or someplace like that trying to set up some fake business entity. So they want you to have a social security number that's used actually to get that. But after that, it's not really tied to that EIN number. Again, it doesn't take very long to get an EIN number. You complete the application online. Don't try to do it after 7 o'clock at night, because they shut the site down. That's Central Time, Regina. But you get that EIN number, and as soon as you complete the form, it'll pop up and give you your EIN number. The last step in legally establishing is either filing a 1023 or a 1023-EZ. That's what gets you your 501c status and makes you an organization that can take tax deductible donations. And the difference between the 1023 and the 1023-EZ is that the 1023 is for organizations that expect to have $50,000 or less in revenue and assets every year for the first 3 years you operate. And there's a checklist on the IRS website, because these applications have to be submitted online. There's a checklist that you can complete to find out whether or not you're eligible to file the 1023. The cost to file the 1023 is $275, and you generally will hear back within like 6 to 10 weeks whether or not you've received approval for that. With the 1023-EZ, it's a longer form. It's $600 to file, but it's for all those other organizations that aren't eligible to file the 1023-EZ. It will generally take 8 to 10 months to hear back about the 1023. It was taking a little bit shorter on that time that I gave you up until COVID hit, and they tended to fall behind. But with either application, what I recommend is that you sit down and you print out, you can go to the IRS website and you can print out a PDF of these applications, and you fill that out. And so you're all prepared when you get on the IRS to fill out that application, you already have all your information together. And even though, ironically, the way that the application online flows is a little bit different than what you have on your PDF, at least you will have every answer on that PDF form, so you can answer those questions fairly easily. And the other thing is the 1023, it's going to ask you more in-depth information. So again, you'll have to have that 3-year budget. You'll have to have, it will ask you about what do you plan to do for fundraising. So you'll have to have an idea of what that looks like. So there's other things that they ask. They want to know where a particular, maybe your dissolution clause is in your bylaws. So you'll need to tell them what paragraph, what section, what page. So that's another reason to do that, the PDF. But any questions about that process?
Cindy?
Yes.
This is Ron.
Yes, Ron.
We recommend that they do the same thing on the EIN application. I've heard that there's only a 15-minute limit to complete the form. So print the form, follow the instructions, fill it out in pencil, and then go back and do the EIN application online.
Yeah, that makes sense. I sometimes give people a PDF when I'm working with them of that so they can fill that out. But I sometimes am sitting down across the desk with somebody helping them get their articles of incorporation, their EIN, and I've gotten pretty quick about it. So as long as they have the answers they can give me, we get through that pretty quickly. But you're right. I mean, any of these that you can print out and fill out ahead of time, you're all prepared, because the IRS website is finicky. So moving on to maintaining that nonprofit status. Well, it's required that you hold a designated annual meeting as a nonprofit organization, generally to elect board members and officers. It can be one of your regular board meetings that you have just said, this is our annual meeting. Or you can have a big event if you want. But really, here at the Kansas Nonprofit Chamber, December is our annual meeting. It's a regular board meeting, but it is the time that we decide and vote on new board members and new officers. We put that out. We're having our annual meeting. Nobody ever comes other than our board, but certainly you have to do that. You have to file an annual report with the state of Kansas. If you're incorporated in Kansas, Regina, you probably have an annual report. Maybe you have to file in New York. Do you know? Check into that.
I'm not quite sure.
You better check into that.
No, I believe it is.
Yeah, because I see a lot of nonprofit organizations lose their incorporation because they didn't file that annual report with the state of Kansas. You go online back to where you got your articles of incorporation. You can do a search for your organization, and it just says there's a place you can click on that says file your annual report. Pay your $40. That's what it costs here to file that annual report in Kansas. Pay your $40, file that annual report, put it on your calendar, go back and do it every year. I'm always amazed when I go both to the IRS website to look up something or the state of Kansas website, how many churches have lost their nonprofit status because they didn't do these simple things. And that always worries me a lot. And then with the IRS, you have to file what's called a 990, which is a report of income. If you don't file a 990 and 3 years go by, you will lose your nonprofit status. And while the process is very similar to getting your nonprofit status the first time, and you might have some of that information from your application and all, you will have to pay whatever it is you paid initially to get that nonprofit status and wait an amount of time to reinstate your nonprofit status. So the 990 is very interesting. If you have $50,000 or less in revenue or assets, then you will file what's called a 990N. It has to be filed online. It literally asks you 3 questions. It does not ask you for any financial information. The first question being, did you have more than $50,000 in revenue or assets this past year? And of course you say no, and then you continue to the other two questions, which I can never recall what they are, but it's really that simple. Then you'll hit submit. Doesn't cost you anything to file that report, but you need to file it. Put it on your calendar and file it. The 990 EZ is the next step, and that is for organizations that have $250,000 or less in revenue and assets. And again, the EZ has to be filed online. And then after you've earned more than $250,000 in revenue and or have more than that in assets, you'll need to file the regular 990. But the 990N requires no financial information. It's not a good reason not to keep records, but they don't require that anyways. Any questions about any of that? The other things that you should do if you're looking at starting a nonprofit organization is make sure that you have proper insurance. So one of those things, or two of the insurances that I really recommend that you look at as an organization is, number one, a directors and officers insurance, which many of you have probably never heard of. It's a unique insurance. You cannot go to State Farm or Farmers or one of those places and get it. But because I told you the board of directors is legally and financially responsible for the organization, if somebody sues a nonprofit organization, they sue the board of directors. And that puts their personal assets at risk. The directors and officers insurance protects them from that. So it's a very important insurance for a board of directors. The other thing that every organization should have is some sort of a general liability insurance in case somebody gets injured or whatever. There may be other insurances you need to have based on what you're doing, but these are the two that I can tell you absolutely should have. You also will need to determine if you're sales tax exempt. And I don't know about in New York, but here, just because you did your articles of incorporation in the state of Kansas and are recognized as a nonprofit organization does not mean you're automatically sales tax exempt. I have a lot of people that call me and say, I went to Walmart, I tried to buy some stuff, they wouldn't take the sales tax off. And yet I have, I'm incorporated in Kansas. And I said, well, sales tax exemption is something totally different. You can certainly apply. Not very many nonprofit organizations in the state of Kansas are sales tax exempt. It's very hard to get here. I wouldn't waste my time, but if you want to do that, you can certainly do that. Certainly, if you have property that the nonprofit owns at some point in time, then you should apply for a property tax exemption. And then once you get employees or even independent contractors, you really need to make sure that you're looking at signing up for the Kansas state employment tax, the federal employment tax, unemployment insurance, and workers' comp. That's all I have. I want to tell you all one more thing about the 1023 and the 1023 EZ, because I forgot to tell you this back when I was talking about that. So people often say, Cindy, if I file the 1023 EZ, because I don't know how much revenue we're going to make, I don't know what grants we're going to get, I don't know what donations we're going to get. If I file the 1023 EZ and in year 2, we bring in $60,000, what happens? Nothing happens. The IRS doesn't come back and fine you. They don't make you go back and fill out the 1023 application. Nothing happens. So that being said, I, however, would not encourage people to try to beat the system when they know, if they've got somebody that's willing to give them money, or they have a good idea that they're going to buy a building the following year or something like that. I wouldn't recommend trying to cheat the system, but people do ask me that because they're worried that they'll do that 1023 EZ and then they'll get some grant or something that will put them over. So that's always worrisome for them. I always tell them if it looks like there's a good probability or it's going to require, if you're going to start a nonprofit, that in year 2, you absolutely are going to be required to have $250,000 or $500,000 to make your programs go, you better do a 1023 application. So questions? I know that was a lot. It's a lot to start a nonprofit, and the business plan is a lot, but
A couple of items came up on the chat, Cindy, of interest. One of the questions is, will we get a copy of your PowerPoint presentation?
Yes.
And if you'd like to send it to either Ron Lunsford or myself, we'll be glad to send those out to everybody that pre-registered for the program. Yep. Also, secondly, question regarding has SCORE business plan template been updated? And do you still offer software for business plans? And Ron responded, yes. The SCORE has a library of financial templates, webinars, and blogs. And you can get those by visiting www.score.org and search the template or form that you're looking for. And also Ron did put a link to Kansas Biz. It's ksbiz.kansas.gov. It's an excellent site, whether you're doing a for-profit or non-for-profit, to make sure you're covering all your bases. So check out ksbiz.kansas.gov for that link. And those are all of the items or questions on the chat so far.
Anybody else want to speak up and ask any questions?
I just had another one come up on the business plan in regards to board members. What exact information do we list?
Again, I would list the names of the board members and where they work and what they do for, if they work for BKD and they're an accountant, that I would list that.
And John, I'll offer that SCORE about 5 years ago decided that those that are wanting to start nonprofit organizations are entitled to SCORE help, and we're more than happy to do that. Not all of us have any experience with nonprofits, even though SCORE is a nonprofit and represented nationwide with about 10,000 volunteers. We'd like to help nonprofits if they want to approach us. SCORE.org, and then choose Find Mentor, and just fill in a quick application, and we'll work with you.
And I have to tell you that if you do that and you request a mentor, I am also a SCORE mentor. You'll probably get connected with me. I have people that surprises because they've met me in some way, and then they go through SCORE and request a mentor. And I'm the do this specialization in nonprofit startups. So
a couple of more questions in the chat have just popped up. One I think is directed towards you, Ron. Will SCORE have a class on strategic planning, either on SCORE's programming side or the library print planning side?
Nothing's planned yet, but we sure could do that.
Okay. And one other question, what company offers the board members insurance?
So one of the organizations that we work with a lot is called Conrade, CONRADE. Conrade Insurance. They're out of Newton, but they serve tons and tons of nonprofit organizations with the D&O insurance. Well, thank you all. Thank you all for letting me present today. Certainly, when you get the PowerPoint, my contact information is on there. I do work lots and lots with nonprofit startups, and I'm always happy to help. So, thank you.
Regina asked, what's the typical number of pages in a business plan? And only enough that you can explain your organization and not have too many questions.
Yeah, I generally tell people like 10 to 12, no more than that.
And I'll offer at this point, John can back me up. The Wichita Library has a wonderful resource called Business Plan Handbook, and it'll have 8 to 12 business plans. Most of them are for profit, but 8 to 12 business plans per volume. And I think we're up to volume 54 now. So Some of those, I recall there's probably 8 or 10 of those are nonprofit business plans.
Yes, that is correct. It's called Business Plans Handbook, and it's available on the second floor of the library, Wichita Public Library. If you're from out of state, you might check, for example, New York Public Library maybe have the resource for you. And they're probably going to have several of the resources that I'll be sharing in our last half hour of the program. So check your local library. Any mid to large size library will have these types of resources available for all of you. Well, thank you so much, Cindy, for that excellent program on business planning for nonprofits. I'd like to spend the last 30 minutes of our session sharing the Wichita Public Library's resources for nonprofits. And the best starting point is our library webpage, which is wichitalibrary.org. And hopefully you can all see that on your screen currently. I'll go ahead and get started. So here in the middle of the screen is a research and learn link. Click on the research and learn, and it takes you to a lot of our different databases. But we have a really fine website for finding a grant, which covers resources for nonprofits, small organizations, and individuals. When you go to this site, it tells you that the library has dozens of circulating books that cover all aspects of starting and operating a nonprofit organization. And these include topics like fundraising, managing, creating a board of directors, and accounting for nonprofits. We have approximately 100 books that check out of the library and approximately 100 reference sources that are here all the time to refer to that focus on nonprofits starting and operating them. The collection at the library is an affiliate of the National Foundation Center. The Foundation Center is based in New York City, where you're at, Regina. The Foundation Center puts out a directory both in print and online. The online is called the Foundation Directory Online, and it's available to libraries and nonprofit chambers around the country. We have about 6 locations in Kansas that offer this database, and of course the Wichita Library is one of those. But if you're from out of state, you might check with your public library for the Foundation Directory Online. It covers information from the 990 forms that Cindy mentioned in her presentation. Anytime a nonprofit grant maker, or a foundation, or a nonprofit recipient does a 990 form, that's public information and gets put into this Foundation Directory Online database. So it's updated throughout the year. It covers about a dozen years of historical information, but we find it's an excellent tool to find grant makers and have your grant writers search that so that they can have contacts in order to get funding for their nonprofit organizations. So the collection also consists of the print directories. It's updated annually, and the online database, the Foundation Directory Online. It also covers some grants to individuals. Primarily, those are scholarship opportunities. So if you have any students that you know of, you can hook them up to the grants to individuals and do some academic scholarship searching as well. It does have a few other grants to special populations like disabled and economically disadvantaged individuals. So there's also some grants for individuals as well. The Foundation Directory Online focuses specifically on 501c3 nonprofits. So generally you will need to have your nonprofit status set up in order to apply for those foundation grants. The print materials also cover things on grant seeking, proposal writing, other means of fundraising, and text on nonprofit management, board leadership, and volunteerism. There's a couple of other links I'd like to show you about. The grants.gov is the public domain of finding grants. So if you go to grants.gov, you can get local, county, state, and national federal government grants. We also have some information about IRS 501c3 exemption requirements. And we have a link here to the Kansas Professional Grant Association. Most states do have a professional grant association, so you might just Google your state professional grant association to get more information about them. Generally, they have membership lists and will have contact people. We'll have a list of their monthly meetings, where they're going to meet, and what the topic will be about. And then finally on our page here, we have some recommended reading collection. These are some of the dozens of foundation books that we have, things on grant writing, fundraising, managing nonprofits, starting and operating. So just a wealth of information about all things nonprofit available in your library. So here at Wichita, it's located on the second floor of the Advanced Learning Library, and we'll be glad to share these books with you. They do check out with a library card, which is free. You can get a library card and not only check out the books, but also get access to our internet access and to the Foundation directory online, which we have on all of the public computers here at the downtown library. So let's take a look at the Foundation directory online. I received a couple of pre-programmed questions recommending some sample searches that we do, so I'm going to include those as well. If you'd like me to do a sample search, you might put it in the chat. If you have any questions about it, be sure to put it in the chat and we'll address it before we end the program today. But this is the Foundation directory online, and it allows you to search for grants for over 100,000 private foundations, public corporations, and government agencies all over the country. It's fairly straightforward to search. Once you sit down at a library terminal, you'll just click on a icon that says Foundation Directory Online, and it'll take you straight to this page. There's also some limited searching you can do from home with your library card. If you go to the library's website, you'll find a link to that on this grants page that we've developed. So to do a sample search, you'll come here to the search bar, and they've got some examples here of what you might search for. They have, for example, ballet school in New York City, or animal shelter in Portland, Maine, or food pantry in Dallas. So basically, if you put in the type of grant searching you're looking for and a geographic location, it will go out and find relevant grants for your searching. So I'm going to put in religion and Wichita, Kansas, because I had a question about church grants pre-program. So you type in what you're searching for and hit the search button, and it will go out and find relevant grants, grant makers, recipients, and 990 forms for you. So it found 227 grants, grant makers, 1,600 grants, and 229 recipients. It shows the top 5 grant makers here, and on the right side, it shows the number of grants that they've given in that category. So Fidelity Investments Charitable Gift Fund, the Wichita Community Foundation, the Berry Foundation, a National Christian Charitable Foundation, and Textron Charitable, which is the Cessna Raytheon company here in Wichita. They've all given multiple grants to various churches and religious organizations here. Here's a list of the grants and the recipients, and it tells you how many grants that they've given over here on the right side. So grants to University Friends Church, Interfaith Ministries, the Catholic Diocese of Wichita, and then specific churches like St. Thomas Aquinas Church. If you click on the view all, it will take you to a list of all of those grants that were given. And they'll start by the total number of grants given. But you can see many grants in the tens of thousands and even hundreds of thousands. So lots of different grants. If you're a church and you're interested in seeking a grant, you can go in and see what the grant was for on all of these grant counts. and find out if it's a good match for your organization. Once you go into the grant maker's profile, here's a grant for Blessed Sacrament Roman Catholic Church in 2020 for $55,550, done by the Wichita Community Foundation. And it was for general purposes, but also their Glory and Praise Challenge grant. If this looks like a good match for you, you can go into the profile for the Wichita Community Foundation, and this is where you get the key information to see if this is a good match for your organization before you apply for your grants. So this tells you what is being funded, what areas. It goes into funding for education and gives you a dollar amount. They also fund arts and culture, health. This is where religion pulls up, human services. So this covers a wide range of what nonprofits typically give monies for. So you might look for a community foundation in your particular area if you're from out of state. But Wichita Community Foundation gives a lot of money to almost all of the nonprofits here in the Wichita area. This map shows where the money is going. So it has the number of grants in the different states, the number of recipients, and also the total amount funded, over $19 million in Kansas. But you can see they have given to a few other states around the country, even though this is a local community foundation. Then the chart over here shows how big the grants are, what's typically being funded. So how many grants for 5 to 10,000, 10 to 25,000, 125 and up. Next, it shows you the most common grant amount is around $10,000. And these are some of the different churches and nonprofits that have received grants. This is the funding interest area for the profile. It covers the subject areas that are funded. So you can go in and see if it's a good match for your nonprofit. It also shows the geographic focus, whether it's national, state specific. Here we even have a couple of grants that have been gone to Canada and Italy. So in some cases, you'll find they're international as well. And these are some of the population target groups that they focus on. Cindy mentioned some different support strategies. So if you're building a new building, or if you need cell phones or computer equipment, you want to look at the support strategies. Here's listings for continuing support, financial sustainability, general support, leadership and professional development, and network building and collaboration. It also covers the different types, transaction types of the grants. Sometimes they'll list matchings in here as well, matching type grants. A little bit of information about the foundation. And what's nice about this database is once you find a good match, it will give 6 other funders to consider based on similar patterns of giving. So here it has 6 other profiles that you can go into grant makers and see what the application process for them as well. And this is where the application process is located, and also RFPs, which is requests for proposals. Visit foundation website for guidelines. Generally, they will have a website that has their guidelines in their application form if they have one. I can tell you through experience, each of these grant makers have different information that they want on their applications. So it's always good to go in and see exactly what they're asking for. In this case, they're wanting applicants to submit the population they serve, the statement of the problem or project will address, qualifications of the key personnel, a timetable for implementation and evaluation of the project, a detailed description of the project and the amount of funding being requested, a copy of the current year's organizational budget or project budget, and then plans for cooperation with other organizations if partnering with anyone. They also would like a listing of the board of directors, the trustees, the officers, and other key people. And then they would like a brief history of the organization and the description of its mission. So that's all going to be specific information that the Wichita Community Foundation requires. But as I said, each grant maker is different. So you'll want to go into the profile to see what's expected. Their initial approach, they do conduct competitive grant rounds upon request. So their board of director meets every April and October. So that's generally when they'll go over new grant applications from grant writers. And they do not have any deadlines, so you can send them year round, and usually you'll be notified within 90 days of whether you've gotten your funding or not. This next section you want to pay attention to, it's the giving limitations section. So this might preclude you if you match any of these, but it says giving limited to the greater Wichita, Kansas area. No grants to individuals except for scholarships, building projects, endowments, fellowships, debt reduction, that kind of thing. And this is a little interesting. It says no support for religious organizations for religious purposes, but we have seen where quite a few of these grants were given to churches and religious organizations. So that's a little misleading. The financial sections is next. So it has the total assets of the grant maker and the total amount of giving. And then it's got a link to previous listings of 990 forms from the grant maker. So you can go back about a dozen years and see the actual IRS 990 form for this grant maker. It also includes a list of the board of directors at this location, and also has some recent philanthropy news and some of the different communications. So whether it's websites, journals, philanthropy news, you can find what's going on within these organizations. And a fairly new addition to this profile is their internet presence, their online communications. So they have a link to their Facebook and their Twitter page. And then finally, at the bottom of the profile, it lists the location of the foundation, as well as the contact information, email address, and the website where you can get more information about application and forms and the missions that they serve. So that's generally what a profile is going to look like for each of the over 100,000 foundations that are in this foundation directory online. So again, you can go in and search by keywords that you're looking for and your geographic location, and you'll come up with listings, similar listings of grants and grant makers as well. Okay, at any time, if you get, or I should say, at any time, you can also print, download, or email any of these results to yourself. So you can create your own custom database of potential grant makers and fundraising for your grant writers. So it's handy to have either a flash drive if you're in person, or have Google Drive so you can save your results, or you can always email them. If at any time you get stuck anywhere, you can always click back on the foundation directory online in the top left corner, and it'll take you back to the main search screen. So let's do another, let me see if we have some items in the chat here. Feel free to search grants related to private schools that focus on trade schools. Okay. Private schools and trade skills. I'll assume that's the Wichita area. So let me go ahead and put in, let's see.
John, you might also mention the e-card.
Oh, sure. Ron was mentioning a e-card, which is a Wichita library card that gives you access to all of our electronic resources, but it doesn't allow you to check out books or movies like a full library card can. But you can sign up for an e-card either through our website, and we'll process that e-card for you so that you can begin searching right away. So I put in trade skills in Wichita, Kansas, and it looks like it brought up, this is the results that they used for their searching. They came up with job training, international relations, and Wichita, Kansas, based on my keywords that I put in trade skills in Wichita, Kansas. They came up with 57 grant makers 164 grants, and 38 recipients for this search. So here are the top 5 grant makers in that area and the amounts that have been funded. Here are the top 5 grant makers and recipients. So some for job training, education, international development, graduate and professional education. And then these are the recipients: Wichita Educational Foundation, Hospitals of Hope, Rainbows United, Via Christi Foundation, SCR Jobs for Progress. What I also might mention is if you already have an existing nonprofit, is you can put in your name of your nonprofit here in the database and see who has funded you in the past. I recommend this to new nonprofit directors if they're not familiar with the history of their organization and who has funded them in the past. I say just do a sample search for your own organization. And this will go back about a dozen years and tell you which grant makers have funded you in the past and which ones may fund you in the future. So that's a good tip to have. And then, yeah, here's some 990 forms, tax forms, based on the search that we did. So yeah, that would be an example of the trade skills in Wichita, Kansas. Just a few months ago, I did some searching for food banks here locally. And we put in food banks in Wichita and came up with some good grant makers to supply our food grant monies. Jessica Good Evans Charitable Foundation, Beeland Foundation, Latner Family Foundation, Kansas Health Foundation. All of those have done funding for our Bread of Life, Lord Steiner, our food pantries, Kansas Food Bank. Those are all good organizations doing a lot of good work. But you can see it's fairly user-friendly and easily searchable. There's also an advanced search you can do. Here where it says advanced search and filters, if you click on that, it will bring up some different subject areas that you can include. And if you're not sure what to use, just click on the box and it will give you some sample subject areas to choose from. And within each one of those, they'll have subcategories. So under human services, they have basic and emergency aid, family services, human services, information and management, job services, shelter and residential care, youth development. So whatever your subject area is, just pick those areas and they'll put your, once you click on it, it'll put it in the list. You can also pick your geographic location, so where the funding will be used. You can also pick your population served, so whether it's low-income people, at-risk youth, women, children, seniors. This is where you can search specifically for your organizational name. So if you have your nonprofit, you can put it in here and find out a listing of your foundation. Our library has a foundation which provides for a lot of special needs of the library. So they're listed in here as well. Also, you can search by location of the grant maker or the recipient. So this search is nationwide, and they do have a who's who section in here. So you can search by keyword name. If you see somebody's name in the newspaper or on the news or in a philanthropy newsletter, you can put their name in here and find out more about their organization. Check the chat again. Senior services in Topeka is a recommended search, so I'll do that. Senior services in Topeka and click the search button. And didn't come up with anything. Let me try something else. Seniors and Topeka. So searching for seniors and Topeka, Kansas, we get a list of 23 grant makers. 70 grants and 10 recipients. These are the top 5 grant makers for that topic. Here's the top 5 grants given and the different recipients in Topeka. And here's a listing of the 10 recipients for those types of grants in Topeka. Again, you can either select your agency or pick one of the agency and see who has funded them for these grants. If you have a similar type of mission or purpose or target audience, this may be a good grant match for you as well. And it can tell you which grant makers have funded them and how to apply for them. So they got monies from Sutherland Foundation in Overland Park, Social Security Life Insurance Company Charitable Trust out of Topeka. Amazon Smile is the philanthropic division of Amazon, their foundation, and Security Benefit Life Insurance Charitable Trust. So they all funded senior services in Topeka area. And so that's how you can find a grant for that. Okay. Any other questions about the Foundation Directory Database? This is available anytime the library is open with a library card. And again, if you're not from the Wichita area, you check with your public library. I know Topeka, Kansas, Emporia, Kansas, Hayes, Kansas, and Dodge City, Kansas, as well as Wichita has access to these. But check your largest local public library where you're at and ask the librarian for the Foundation Directory online database or any books or materials that they may have to support nonprofits as well. And again, you can get a free library card at any library location. Just show them something like your driver's license and they'll issue you a free card. Generally, with that card, you can check out materials. With an e-card, you can access all of the online databases, access the internet, so a wealth of electronic resources as well. All right, we're getting close to our wrap-up time, so I don't see any other questions in the chat. Ron or Cindy, did you want to mention anything else before we wrap up?
Thank you very much for a very excellent presentation, Cindy and John.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I do apologize that we didn't get the email sent out in a more timely manner, and I'm glad, Regina, you mentioned that. I did talk with our director, and she went ahead and sent that back out, so we did have some additional people join us today. We are recording this session, and we'll get it polished up and put it on our library YouTube channel, so you might look for that as well in the future. And I want to thank everybody for participating in today's program. If you're interested in any upcoming library programs, please visit www.wichitalibrary.org/events for a complete calendar. Thank you again for your support of the Wichita Public Library, and this ends today's program.